Hi, Miles. This is Miles Coleman, a very good friend and a past student of mine, and now I could actually learn a lot from him. He's a master qigong, a martial artist, if we can use that word, master.
Right,
Both of us, both Miles and I, usually laugh at that because, in one sense or another, we're all beginners, no matter what.
right.
But nevertheless, this is Miles Coleman, and Miles Coleman is one of the best students that ever passed through the East West Herb course. He took it and made it his own, and then he became the authority on herbal formulas, and students would go study with him, and he was amazing with us, and so I want to bring him out and introduce him to the public because he's really got a very unique place in the herbal world today, I think, because he's the as a martial artist, which is how he came to this initially. He integrated and took the time to spend a few years to learn herbal medicine, first from me, and then who knows from who else afterwards. And so he integrates herbal medicine with martial arts in a way that's fantastic, and makes products for his students and so forth, and teaches, and he also sees people as an herbalist. And this is one of the great arts of Chinese medicine. Herbal medicine is one of the arts, and martial arts is as well. They're both equal in terms of the mastery of Chinese wisdom.
Yeah.
So hi, Miles.
Hi, Michael. So good to see you again.
Yeah,
Glad we're doing
always,
this.
always, and uh, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about your background so people know more about who you are before you came to me and learning herbal medicine and beyond.
Yeah, I born and raised in this little far northern Wisconsin rural dairy community, and just very lucky to have the parents and family I did because both my brother and I were encouraged in our uh, what a lot of people would have seen as strange pursuits. And when I was like 13 years old, I saw the Kung Fu series with David Carradine, and it just totally resonated with me.
Yeah, I remember that really well.
And just like I'm like, oh my God. And the 60s and 70s were a big heyday for martial arts in America. 60s and 70s is when Kung Fu really came on the scene. And I wanted to do Kung Fu. And then I think it was in the mid 70s, there was a gentleman from California moved to this community and was teaching a very authentic system of Kung Fu from the Southern Shaolin Temple. And I started studying with him. And then because it is very traditional in Chinese culture, if you study medicine, or if you study martial arts, or if you study art or philosophy, you learn the other things. And so many of the Kung Fu people, they made their living as healers.
Right, Cheng Man,
Because
for instance,
right,
he
perfect
was an
example.
artist and a healer, an herbalist, and
Right.
and an acupuncturist too, I think.
Yes, I think so. And so, that one often when you're on that journey of knowledge, you don't realize like one thing is leading you to the next thing until you come to the next thing.
Right.
Right.
Well, I never came to the martial arts thing, we talked a little bit before we started this thing about my adventures into Tai Chi, which I won't go into, but I still practice it a little bit, but
Right.
uh, but Miles is definitely uh, I, I think maybe not entirely unique, but very unique, because most people who teach kung fu don't know anything else.
No.
They hardly know Chinese philosophy, maybe the very rudiments of Chinese philosophy,
Right.
and they're just teaching these little kids to run around and bang each other around and so forth, and waft their hands and do the dance.
Right.
But they don't understand the depth of wisdom that's behind all of that, and that one of the sovereign rules of uh, of martial arts and Chinese, from the Chinese way of thinking, is that if you learn to hurt somebody, you should also learn to heal them.
Absolutely.
And that is one of the fundamental things. And so Miles is very unique in the sense that he is a complete Chinese master of both kung fu and Chinese medicine.
Yep.
And he also, wanted to ask you about kung fu, because I think, as I understand it, it's not like it's not like one form.
No.
And I think the words kung fu means something. What? How would you translate it?
It really literally means attaining skill and benefit from hard work.
And that's what it is. I think they use many different maneuvers, and they integrate, karate and all those things can kind of come out of it.
Right.
And they make a deal out of it. But kung fu is much more all encompassing.
Right. Yes.
And
you have all these, you have systems that are philosophical, and systems based on nature, and systems based on, I think the Chinese government recognizes that there's something like, 600 to 800 specific, identified, categorized kung fu styles.
Right. I think
so. That's vast.
I think it was originally evolved as a martial art for war for purposes
right.
of war.
Right.
But
a lot of the stuff that came out of northern China, because that's where the ruling class really kind of was, Beijing in that area, and that stuff really falls along the lines of martial arts were martial arts, and they were supplements to people using spears and swords and all of that.
Right.
But then the southern Chinese stuff falls more along the lines of kind of like civilian defense arts, right?
I see.
Yeah.
So where does Chinese herbal medicine, traditional medicine, fit in with kung fu in your way of seeing things?
Yeah. So it's very, I don't know how old, but the tradition, a lot of the kung fu people. So how it is,
has to be a health component to it all.
Yes,
in other words, somehow or another, the idea of going out and being able to defend yourself or to fight also moves into the category. Well, if I'm going to do this, I have to be healthy.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're thinking, well, I'm practicing, I'm injuring other people. I need to make them feel good after I've bopped them over the head or whatever.
Right. I think for a long time, kung fu, and still now, and still is, it's physical education for people. Uh-huh. It's kind of like somebody goes to play baseball. Well, maybe they're good enough to become a collegiate player or a professional player. But not everybody who learns to play baseball goes there. But it's a cultural thing, and they play it. And I think that's how kung fu is a lot. It's like, yes, you're going to have these nuts like me who are going to do this to their dying day and get this high level of proficiency, in something that you hope you never have to use on anybody, right?
Right.
But then it is, they recognize there's this huge physical health, mental health, spiritual health, emotional health component to it. And
so this whole system of herbal medicine, a branch of herbal medicine, is called Dida.
Right. And in China, so in China, it was like everybody wanted their children to learn from kung fu people because they would get an education. Many times they were scholars, they would get physical training, but nobody wanted their children to be a kung fu practitioner, because China had evolved into this society where they really looked down on people who did things physically. Huh. So the kung fu people are like, okay, we're walking this path, but how do we make a living? So, they were either bodyguards or, millet soldiers or something. They were all trying to find a rich patron and teach their kids. Uh-huh. Or maybe they were an artist. But the traditional thing, especially in the Southern traditions, is they'd run these Ditta or Dida clinics, right? So they're doing bone setting, Tuina, they're doing herbal application, they're doing that kind of work. So it's real traditional. You go to Hong Kong, or even, I bet if you went down to San Francisco, you'd find a kung fu studio, and you'd find like a hit medicine clinic attached to it. Huh. And obviously, if it's really vigorous training, people are acquiring injuries, and you got to be able to fix that so people can keep training. But then, I get a lot of business from the martial community, but then you have martial artists are like, can you help my husband, or can you help my wife, or can you help my
Exactly.
sister?
Exactly.
Right.
Right.
So you get the fringe or people not even involved in it coming in. Right.
So, right. And as I understand it, DDA means hit medicine.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's a whole branch of herbal medicine that and a whole they use the standard Chinese herbs to make special formulas to treat injuries.
Right.
So, and injuries is not necessarily only martial arts. So there's a value to learning DDA, at least enough of it so that you can understand that the Chinese medicine can be used externally and topically and internally to treat injuries. And
Right.
A lot of times when we study herbal medicine, we're always thinking about treating internal things.
Right.
But there's external injuries and things that happen to us in life, which is oftentimes just as bad as anything that we develop internally.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
you want to talk about some of your experiences making DDA and what herbs you use and how you use them and things like that?
Yeah. So, going
And
back
do you
that
have these? Do you have these for sale?
Yes, I have these for sale. I have a website.
Tell
People
us
can
your
go on
website.
there. It's www.blackbeltherbs.com.
Okay, we'll repeat that too several times throughout this.
Yeah. So there's info there about me, and there's products on there, and there's stuff about the herb school and qigong programs. But the way I have the, like the product thing set up is, I see so many people taking Chinese medicine and just kind of wanting to turn it into this, like, well, here's a formula, here you go. And I think, you miss out on so much. The advantage of Chinese medicine is that somebody's going to sit down with you and at least ask a few questions and sort of nail, like, what's the pathology, the pattern or whatever going on with you. Right.
Right.
So when people go to that website, a lot of times they're frustrated because they're like, well, how do I order this stuff? And I'm trying to, encourage them to like engage in a discussion with me of like, I know you got back pain, but what's it doing? Does it do this? Is it bad in cold weather? And then I can really, as like you do, you can really nail it down and say, oh, okay.
Right.
Here's what I need to give you, kind of thing. And here's how to modify the formula. Right.
Right.
So
it's www.com. Black
belt herbs. Yep.
Blackbeltherbs.com.
Yep.
And you can anybody out there who's doing martial arts should definitely have this as a source to go to, because I tell you, I see so many people who do yoga and do different kinds of physical things, and especially as we get older, the tendency to injure ourselves is rampant.
Right.
I'm almost afraid to do any yoga at this point in my life.
Right. Right.
and I see people coming in and just because they think they're doing everything right, eating everything right, and then they go to a yoga class and they say, well, we're doing very safe yoga, and then whoops, one little turn, and now they're crippled.
Right.
I had a woman like that, and she was amazed because I did Korean hand therapy on her, and within she became absolutely adored me since then. Within 5 minutes, her pain was completely gone, but she was completely crippled from a yoga class.
Right.
And Miles has all these ointments and liniments and things that he will probably immediately put it on to any of your students when they have a challenge, physical challenge.
Right. I'll say this too. One of the things that I've been doing the last few years is, well, when I got with, it's very common in Kung Fu that all the teachers will know something about like Dit to Jiao, like a basic sort of liniment or
Right.
maybe some moxa kind of thing. But there are people who are really trained in it. So you can think of this DDI, you can think of it as like the sports medicine of its day. So
Exactly.
they have all of these formulas for vitality and training injuries and, aiding meditation. So if you can find somebody who knows the whole system, it's a whole system, right?
Yeah, one of those things that interested me was how you can make your skin resistant to being hit.
Right.
What kind of herbs are used for that?
So
Astringent herbs?
yeah, I mean, I studied, so Ditta Jiao, iron strike wine or iron fall wine.
Uh-huh.
You find that all over, and every kung fu teacher will tell you that they've got the original formula from the Shaolin Temple, and
Right.
everybody else's is garbage, and that whole thing. And I mean, I've literally probably, I still collect Ditta Jiao formulas because people will be like, "Hey, could you make this for me?" And I get to see it. And really, after looking at all these different, they're all really pretty much the same. I mean, they're all pretty much drawing from blood moving, blood regulating, kidney yang herbs for bones, some of those yin tonics for tendon, some heat clearing herbs. Really, all the formulas are very, very, very similar.
Huh.
There's some unusual ones and rare ones and little known ones that get used and things like that. The sort of karate approaches, they spend a lot of time really thickening the skin
Right.
and building all this callus. The Chinese martial arts feel that that's very unsophisticated.
Right.
Their idea is to make a hand that is relatively normal, but is really very powerful. So these other karate traditions, they spend more time doing things, making this skin thick, where the Chinese are trying to make the inside of the hand very strong,
Uh-huh.
so that it can resist that damage. Right?
Can you take some time to mention some herbs that go into that by name?
Yeah. So so a lot of important. We could just like kind of go through the materia medica almost. So if we looked at like the release the exterior herbs, cinnamon twig is really, really important in HIT medicine.
Huh.
Things like
what does it do?
Well, it has this ability. It moves blood, but it has this very specific ability to move blood around the joints and disperse cold and blood stagnation out of that.
Okay.
And I use that, and I mean, it would have other uses, but like my teacher used to say those lofty things that those old school practitioners would say. He's like, it's impossible to practice HIT medicine without cinnamon twig.
Okay, I like that.
Right?
I like those hyperboles because they.
Right? Exactly.
There's usually something behind them.
There's usually something behind it. And that is an incredibly effective herb, and you will see that in a lot of HIT medicine form, especially trauma ones.
So what kind of preparation would you put it in? An alcohol, oil?
Yeah. So the classic Chinese preparation is this Dit Da Jiao, Ditdajow. And it means like iron strike wine or iron fall wine. So there's this idea like you got hit or you fell off a horse or the oxen ran over you and you put this stuff on. But there's also a category of hand and body conditioning where they use these variations of jiao so they can do repetitive striking, or beating their torsos or whatever.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Right. And what it does is it prevents bee pain. It prevents, evils, arthritis, rheumatism from establishing itself and becoming an issue down the line.
Right. And to bring this into a larger arena, a lot of people are contractors. They're woodworkers, they're house builders, they're handymen. And my son, for instance, recently was on a ladder and he fell off and he fractured a vertebrae and broke a rib. And now he's laid up for ideally 3 months to heal. And I was able to send him some herbs that help stop the pain because it was so intense. And the doctors give you opioids for it.
Right.
I'm currently using kratom for intractable pain. It's incredibly effective, and I think it's also anti-inflammatory because it's so nasty bitter, but it works beautifully to stop pain.
Right.
And I only give people when they have intractable pain, and he's out of pain now. He stopped using it, and a teaspoon of that twice a day, and he was able to function and so forth. But that's my experience. But Miles, I'm sure, has many other things that he uses that we can talk about here. And
yeah.
Cinnamon
So
twigs, good.
I teach this. I got an online course. It's about 25 hours, and it's teaches the basics of hit medicine.
And they contact you at
That black belt www.blackbeltherbs.com, and they
okay.
can sign up, and it's all pre-recorded lectures, and they can watch it. And I use kind of
Fantastic.
a stripped down 5 element theory thing because we're kind of just really focusing on some of those evils. We're focusing, and again, that Chinese idea of like there can't be any pain if there's not a blockage of qi and blood.
Exactly.
But then you have these other evils come to roost. So you have wind, spasticity, you have cold, you have damp, you have heat, and then you disperse those evils. But the secret to all of it then is, and that a lot of people, even if they're skilled, they don't do, is you like if somebody has a tendon ligament injury, we go, well, the liver rules that. So then you got to go and look at what's the state of the liver. Is blood healthy? Is the liver healthy? And then that's how you make sure you get that complete full healing, and that B pain doesn't reestablish itself again. So that's why you see tonics.
So you're giving them herbs internally as well as externally.
Yes.
That's interesting. And what's your opinion about, which is what my son did, immediately putting an ice pack on your pain?
Yeah. See, so in that hit medicine tradition, they say ice is for dead things.
Exactly.
Right. So, because what do most people do? They get the biggest ice pack they can find. They
Yep.
sprain their finger and they put this thing on, right?
Right.
Well, then you chill all that tissue, you block all that qi and blood flow further up, and you create what they call dead qi, right?
Exactly.
So we use this. So if we look at hit medicine, there's kind of like 4 cornerstones. There's all these Jiao recipes. There's a thing we'll talk about now about San Huang San, the 3 yellows, plasters, peel them off and stick them on, and then these internal hit pills.
So the 4 yellows is for inflammation.
It is, right.
They're the kind of golden seal, turmeric would figuring them as common herbs. But also in Chinese medicine, there's coptis and what else?
Rhubarb, philodendron bark, gardenia.
Rhubarb is interesting because everybody thinks rhubarb is just to make you poop.
Right.
It's actually a really powerful blood mover, and
it is.
And there have been books written on just rhubarb.
Right.
And I have to confess, I don't use a lot of rhubarb in my practice.
I don't either, Michael. I used to because you see it in a lot of hit medicine formulas, but I use gardenia a lot, and I think gardenia is amazing because it's got this kind of blood moving, damp, heat clearing kind of action. So it's perfect in acute stuff because you break all those blood vessels. You've got all that fluid accumulation there. You've got all that heat from the initial inflammatory stage. It's one of the big players in 3 yellows. But what you do is you'll love this little story. So traditionally they would powder the herbs, and then they would either use egg whites or green tea, and they put it in a bowl, and you put the green tea in there and you stir it up, and you want to get it where it's kind of like baby poop. It's thick and kind of viscous. To be called a turtle's egg is a big insult in Chinese culture, right? I guess the idea is like,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So if you hear these old traditional Chinese teachers calling somebody a turtle's egg, it's not a good compliment, right? So my teacher, I would mess up the 3 yellows all the time because I would, not put enough. I'd make it too soupy, or I wouldn't get it enough, and it wouldn't be the right consistency. And he'd always yell at me like, "You turtle's egg! I've showed you how to do this."
Really?
Yeah. 10 different times, and you're still screwing it up. You know what I mean? But you make that, and then what you do is you put that around the injury, and then they cover it with like an ace bandage or something, and it does everything ice will do without causing the detrimental effects of ice.
Right, because the herbs are cooling, but that's not temperature cold.
Right,
so,
exactly.
So my teacher, Miriam Lee, and I'm sure I understand now why she said that. She said when you put ice on an injury, that place is going to develop arthritis later on.
Right.
And I completely understand that. Ice is death in Chinese medicine.
Right.
There's no other way around it. I don't see there's nothing redeemable in the Chinese philosophy that I know of that has to do with ice.
Right.
Cold is the ultimate enemy of life.
Right. And if you look at like what the sports trainer people do, they ice, but what they do is they take little Dixie cups with water and they freeze them, and then they just peel off a corner of it and then spot apply it, right? So they don't do this. I mean, yes, you'll see sometimes these guys crawling into ice baths, but that's not really the way to go about it. They are much more judicious in their application of physical cold.
Right.
Yeah.
I had one experience, and this is of having somebody who was injured while I was sitting there watching a volleyball match, and they were injured, and I was sitting on the bench, and they came because they couldn't play anymore. They came and sat down next to me, and on the other side, somebody was smoking a cigarette. And I said, "Can I borrow your cigarette?" He said, "Okay." And I did moxa with the cigarette on the injury, and it was immediately gone. They went in and played. Moxa is applying heat to injuries in a very systematic way. You're not like necessarily burning it, but you're applying heat,
Right.
and it causes the tissues to swell, so more blood actually goes into it, and the bad blood, which is the blood that's stuck in there from the injury, is flushed out.
Right.
And as I understand it, moxa and the heat that comes from burning an herb is more like infrared. And so there's a big thing these days of now finding that infrared therapy is very effective, but that's basically moxa.
It's so fun because I'm teaching this little local herb class, and one of the people in it is one of my kung fu students. And at the end of it, he and I were talking, but I literally was quoting what you just said. I said, "Look, this is what my teacher, Michael Tierra, says about moxa. You know, he says it's like infrared heat." I mean, I just literally last night gave that same thing. You know what I mean? It's awesome.
Yeah, you need the ash. You need the heat to go through the ash. And so they make these TTP lamps. You've probably seen them.
Yes.
They're a special lamp, and they have a plate on them, and the plate has got minerals. So the idea is that the heat goes through these minerals, and it becomes infrared. Then it's not like applying a match or a fire directly to the area.
Right.
And so and the reason of that is that it goes deeper. The fire is just more on the surface burning down, but the infrared goes deep and then burns up. That's why it takes a while for it to get so hot. Somebody can't. You have to move it away and reapply it then.
Right. Right. Here's an interesting little story for you, because so one of my older kung fu brothers is just this amazing physical specimen. And you could say like this guy is like the perfect wood element constitution. It is just like driven, go, 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 food in, energy out, poop, sleep, and do it all over again. And he's always been that way. And this guy would work for the county, and there's a lot of snow up here. So, you know, he might work an 80-hour week pushing snow off the highways. And he's teaching 3 different kung fu classes. And he has 3 young daughters and a very happy wife, right? And I mean, just the level of physical exertion of this individual would exhaust most people just to watch him for a day, right?
Uh-huh.
So in the middle of all this, he gets this idea he's going to build a house. So he draws the blueprints, he cuts the wood down on his land. He's building this house, and he's up on like the 2nd or 3rd floor, and he falls off.
Oh.
So you're taught how to do break falling in most martial arts. You know, it's a way to set your body so that when you slam into good old terra firma, the damage is minimized. So he falls from like 2 or 3 stories, and all he does is he dislocates his elbow when he does this slapping break fall. And I beg him for years. Yeah, that's all that happened. So I beg him for years, like, please, not years, but let me work on that elbow, because he got a really bad doctor. They put him in a cast, and they literally set the cast like this. So when they took it off, guess what? He couldn't even hardly bend his arm. Exactly. So with all that wood determination, you know, he's working and working, and he finally gets his arm to where, you know, maybe he can he can straighten it and move it, but he doesn't have that full range of capability.
Right.
So then he finally comes and he's like, hey, can you help that? And I'm like, so there is so much dead chi trapped in this thing. So one of the things you'll see people use is that Zhengu Shui, the evil bone water penetrating bone liquid, right?
Yeah, I use it all the time.
Right. So I was always taught like that was for bone setting. Like you put that on and you cover it, because if you just put it on, it's very aromatic and it feels cooling, evaporating off. But if you cover it, what it does is the vapor of it can't evaporate off. It drives it in deep. So it's incredibly aromatic. Then it turns into a very hot liniment. So I put some, yes, go ahead.
Let me repeat that. Would you repeat that? You put it on and then you cover it.
Yes.
So you keep it moist. How about moistening the cloth and put it on?
You could, yes, you could do that. What, I don't know where I got it from, but one teacher they would put it on, on the skin, and then they would wrap plastic wrap around it.
Yeah.
And the idea was like, because it's very caustic if you do that. And so you don't leave it on longer than maybe like a half hour, right?
Okay.
So he's on the table. I'm just kind of doing some little energy stuff, trying to move chi through there. I did some mocks on him. I put the Zhengu Shui on it. I covered it up. And as he's going, I'm like, now remember, Mike, get home, wash that stuff off and whatever. So he, being who he is, he drives home. He forgets about it. It's his daughter's birthday party. 2 hours later, he said all of a sudden his arm feels like it's on fire. And he has these huge quarter-size fluid blisters on his arm. But you know what happened? He said as he was reaching for the phone to curse me out, he reached out and his arm totally straightened out. So it was principle of counter irritation, right?
Brilliant. Yeah.
And he did it on his own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are that's the way that wisdom gets accumulated over centuries, through situations like that.
Right.
People just accidentally try something and it worked.
Right.
And then it becomes a principle then, and it gets passed along.
Right. Right.
Well, when do you favor using oil as a base versus alcohol, and what else can you use as a base? You mentioned egg white. You can put the powders of the herbs and then put egg white on it, and it will congeal it. So that would be a good thing to use on a poultice, I guess.
I use, the 3 yellows, I use Vaseline, and I know a lot of people, but I'm from the generation when my mom would put Vaseline in all my orifices, and we would actually, if you had a chest cold, people would swallow a tablespoon of that. I know probably
Vaseline. I never heard about swallowing it, but yeah, I think Vaseline is a good carrier, is a good medium.
Not Vicks, Vicks Vapor Rub. People would swallow a spoon of Vicks Vapor Rub, with the menthol and all that kind of thing.
Works great.
Works great. And up here with the native community, they're really big on kerosene.
Yep, kerosene was a North American thing.
Right. So they'll make liniments and stuff with kerosene and all that. When I make the 3 yellows, I just melt Vaseline and I just stir the herbs in and get a good emulsification. And how I do it is I don't really follow any weight to volume ratio. I just do it. I keep putting the powdered 3 yellows into the Vaseline, and you're stirring it because you really got to get that
right.
The two. And what you'll find is there's a point where you're stirring it. You can almost sort of feel like as the spoon is scraping the bottom, you can feel the powder falling out of solution right behind it. And then it's like you got the maximum amount of herb that you're going to be able to get into that. Right. And then I just pour it into little jars and I have it and it keeps forever. And that's how I use like the 3 yellows.
I also wonder what happened to camphorated oil. That was it. Along with Vicks Vapor Rub, my mother used to combine camphorated oil and smear that on me.
Right.
And camphor, of course, is a very important herb in Chinese medicine for external treatments.
Right.
And relieving pain and inflammation.
You know, one thing that I got from you, one of many things I got from you, was in that Vedic tradition of how they're so big about medicated oils.
Right.
And Vedic method of making an oil, you know, where it's oil and water and you simmer out the water. That's how I make my St. John's wort oil. And it really is a superior way to make an oil
No
because,
question. Yeah.
right, it tempers so you don't deep fry the herbs, right? But I've been doing this more the last few years. I think St. John's wort it is such an amazing vulnerary, you know, pain, wound healing herb. I
Right.
think extraordinary. And I think this, I don't know how you can quite fit it into the Chinese materia medica, though they do use it, but they get one from Japan or places in China, and I've used it. It is not like the North American
Really.
St. John's wort. It doesn't have that magic mojo that I think that the North American stuff does. But what I've been finding is like if I make this St. John's wort oil and somebody's got an injury and I give them a bottle of Jow and I tell them put it on. And the way I do it is like I tell them like put it on and let it absorb in. And what you'll notice, it's almost kind of like doing moxa. It's like you'll put it on and you just keep doing applications and you'll finally somewhere maybe around like the third, fourth, fifth time you do that, you'll notice the Jow is not absorbing in well. That means you've really saturated the injury. And then what I'll do after that is I'll put St. John's wort oil over the top of that. Because if oil is a carrier to the nervous system, as they say in, I guess, Vedic tradition, right?
Right.
Well, then you drive that Jow deeper into the body where you want it to go.
Exactly.
And I find like a good dip to Jow is pretty miraculous. But if you do this, like you could probably just use a plain old oil, but to like put that St. John's wort oil on top of that Jow application, that's pretty amazing.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Well, it's pretty wonderful how we develop our own wisdom traditions, and right now we're passing them along between two herbalists talking together.
Right.
And you know, books are great, but you don't get this kind of thing.
Right.
And it really comes down to the fact that when you're that there's ultimately experience is really the ultimate teacher. Everything you learn from a book is just, and even in a course or class, like it's just preparing you for the actual thing of practice. And practice is really important, and the experience is where you actually learn.
Yeah.
Where you actually are engaging and occasionally having to make mistakes. Maybe you didn't learn something that was taught way back, or maybe it wasn't told to you.
Right.
And the one thing to keep in mind is that when you get to the level where, for instance, I know that I am, and Miles is that you can sit here and study with somebody, and if you get one or two little pearls, as we call them, from an hour's worth of talk, those become golden, and that becomes your experience that goes into your wisdom bag. And too many of the herb students in the East-West course think that they have to know it all.
Right.
And you can't know it all.
Right.
I use books all the time. I use all kinds of different ways to remember things, especially now that I'm getting older.
Right.
I know it's out there at least.
Right.
but having those kinds of anchors where you understand, where you have these wisdom things that are yours, you never forget them.
Right.
Because it's an experience. That idea, if you went to a Chinese class and said, "Can you use tobacco for moxa?" They look at you and say you were crazy.
Right.
Because it's not going to be taught.
Right.
But that's just a little thing, and people are smoking cigars and cigarettes around you and getting injured at the same time.
Right. When you taught at seminar, it didn't matter what you were teaching. I was going to come to your class, and I don't care how foundational it was or whatever. And I'd have my notebook because I had learned long ago that somewhere in that talk, you were going to drop a pearl. And if
Right.
I was paying attention, I was going to grab that up. So in my own head right now, I can think of some of the pearls that I got from you that I use, that I'm like, well, son of a gun, he was right. That is right.
Yeah, and they're yours now.
Right, right.
And now you've got something I love to have.
Right.
Matter of fact, you gave me a few during this discussion. Thanks.
Nice. You're more than welcome. That's payback.
These talks with herbalists who I admire, and there's a lot of people who call themselves master herbalists, and I would always turn my back on those. I wouldn't even want to interview them. But
Right.
I've selected a group of people who I actually have grown to admire, and Miles you're in that group, and
I'm humbled by that, because I talk about you all the time to my students, and
yeah, well, thank you.
And tell people, like, look, this is what we're all trying to, we're trying to stay the course. And yeah, so I think the world of you as well. And you know that,
Yeah. Well, Miles, it was you were one of the best teachers the East-West course ever had. And I watched your evolution from the very beginning, and how you just took this thing and ran with it. Now, what I think Miles brings to this, and he may not quite have got it, is that martial arts requires discipline. And he brought to this knowing that you had to have discipline if you're going to learn anything.
Right.
And I have thousands of people who have enrolled in the East-West Herb course, and I dare say very few of them have the discipline to really make it work for them.
Right.
But those that do, like Miles, are stellar, and that's what reassures me that we have something that is valuable if you're willing to apply discipline to it.
Right.
Martial arts, if it teaches you nothing else, it teaches you discipline.
Right. Right.
I'm a pianist. Most of the time, it's not playing the piano; it's practicing the piano. It's like any art is like that.
Right. And that thing you sent me about mastery, one of the things that jumped out immediately was, like, my first Kung Fu teacher used to talk about plateaus all the time, and literally saying, you're going to spend the vast majority of your walk in the martial path on some kind of plateau, wondering, like, where's the next thing, or the next horizon seems so long. And it's like that time on the plateau is very difficult, because you have your ego expectation of, like, well, I got that, I should have got this now, and why am I not? And what you don't realize is it's like the plateau is where you're actually developing yourself every day, so you can have that aha moment or that next jump to the level. Right. But everybody gets focused on the top of the mountain moment instead of going,
exactly,
what got you there, right?
Yeah, this conversation is, as much as anything else, is talking about how a person like Miles can take something and turn it into and make it a part of his own mastery.
Right.
Something that is fairly rare. As a teacher, I can say that.
Wow. And East-West is a school, honestly. I mean, it's a school known for turning out, I think it turns out, some of the finest practitioners and teachers. I mean, there is quality that comes through East-West.
Yeah, thank you. And there's quality now comes from your course. How do they reach it?
Right.
What is it? Black belt something?
Yeah, at www.blackbeltherbs.com. And I call it like the Shinfa school. So it's HSIN and then Fa. And what Shinfa is a Taoist term. It means to know something through the direct experience of it.
Right.
And that to me, I just want to back up a little bit and say, like when I came from the martial arts and I came into your school, it was so familiar to me. And people would be sitting here right now going, well, how can a martial arts school be so familiar to an herb school? Because the thing that I saw that you were doing was, it was just like the Kung Fu class. It wasn't this theoretical thing. It was like, here's a punch coming at your face and you better be able to do something with that.
Uh-huh.
And, I came into your school and here are people eating mantis egg cases and tasting the energetics of it. And it was so visceral and it felt like home to me. And that's why I always say, like, what I am doing, is it a Kung Fu school that's teaching herbs, or is it an herb school that's teaching Kung Fu? Right.
Right.
It's the same thing. Right.
And I know for a fact, knowing Miles, that you couldn't find a better teacher for herbal medicine or Kung Fu than Miles, especially if you're into martial arts and personal development. I got to hang this up.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing too, because we're teaching and trying to find demographics of people who are open to this whole idea and do it, and one of the things I kind of see, like in the herbal world, is, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody, but it's like I see people trying to accomplish their own healing, or they have their own issues, and that's great. But it's like, if you are going to do this for a living, you have to have some intestinal fortitude. You have to, I often tell people, it's like, look, you got to have some kind of practice. You got, whether it's yoga or, whatever it is, some spirituality, because you got to have this thing that's going to sustain you while you're sitting there,
right,
listening to really difficult stories and having to have really strong chi and, Jing Qi Shen and help people or whatever.
right.
And so I often find, like, martial arts people make really good students because they understand the discipline, but they're strong. They're grounded and strong internally. And I see people that I'm kind of like, I think you really need to get stronger and more grounded internally before you're going to be a practitioner,
Right. And I think that understanding how you work with a teacher is very important, because people will sign up for courses and they'll find another course and say, well, I'll take that one. Well, sometimes they're complementary. If any of my students decided to study with Miles, I think I would encourage them. But I couldn't say that about everything. But when you're studying with a teacher, and you're going a ways with them, you're going to realize that teacher is also changing with you as you learn.
Right.
So that you're not just going to get one thing. You're going to get, oh, that thing wasn't so great. Let's do this now.
Right.
And that's the progress with the teacher. As a pianist, I'm constantly looking for how to solve particular problems at the keyboard, and I might find a teacher who has one or two really great ideas for that, and then I'll go to another one because I have another problem. But if I stayed with that one teacher and said, well, this helped a little bit, but it didn't quite
right.
do the whole thing. What else can I do? And you challenge the teacher then to dip into their experience to give you, because so the bottom line is that you want to find a teacher who you feel has integrity, that is worth spending a while with.
Yeah.
And then doing that and really getting into it. And if you learn anything else, you learn how to fit it into that.
Right.
Not go somewhere else.
In our current kind of culture and whatnot, I think people have this idea, like, all the teachers are supposed to be benevolent and wonderful and kind and patient and all this. And I'll tell you right out, I think probably you've had the same experience. It's like all the teachers I ever had, were all from that kind of Vajra thunderbolt tradition, right? It was like you were going to get hit with it if you didn't kind of get it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And some of the best teachers I had were people that I literally had to go, like, boy, this person is really difficult. And if this information wasn't so good, I'd move on. And, you stay with them to a point where sometimes you're literally like, okay, I just can't deal with this personality anymore, and I'm going to move on. But,
Right.
those are often, Shakespeare said, right? Iron sharpeneth iron. And if you want to get good, sometimes you got to hang with people who are really challenging and maybe difficult. And I'm not advocating teachers abusing, people just because they feel like it. But it's like demanding teachers are demanding,
Right.
right? And I
Absolutely.
always felt you demanded the best of us. That's what you were there for. You were growing and trying to learn, and you wanted people to push you so you could be pushed and learn more. And you demanded excellence from people, and I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
absolutely. That's the key. You teach to learn. And the student and the teacher are both learning together.
Right.
The teacher just is kind of like leading the path a little bit.
Yep.
We've turned this around a little bit because the real issue about speaking to Miles is that he's a martial artist, qigong, as well as an herbalist, and the fact that he has a deep understanding of trauma medicine, and that's unique in all the people that I've talked to. Thank you, Miles.
Yeah. Thank
This
you
has
thank you.
been a wonderful experience.